Welcome to The Standard in Vancouver. I'm Randall Mark. Tonight, the question about who was really behind the events of 9/11 continues to mount. The controversy around the events of 9/11 continues to gather steam. Although immediately dismissed by some, there are legitimate questions that have never quite been answered. Joining me to discuss some of these questions is Richard Gage. He's the founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Got lots of show and tell here. We'll get into that in a little bit. We've got lots of time to really get into the issues. But let's start with this. You're an architect, and how did you first get involved in trying to challenge the traditional idea of what happened in 9/11? How did you first get interested in this?
Well, first of all, I've been an architect for 20 years, worked on numerous different types of buildings, including steel-framed, fireproofed buildings. I was on my way to a construction site observation, and I heard on the radio 2 years ago the disturbing conclusions of a rather reluctant 9/11 researcher, David Ray Griffin.
Okay.
And this started me on a path that I changed my life.
It's like a religious experience almost.
Yeah, I had never heard of an alternate theory to the World Trade Center collapses before. The official theory tells us that the planes entered these buildings, and shortly thereafter, due to fire, the structure was weakened and the building collapsed in a gravitational collapse down to the ground. Well, that's not what Dr. Griffin was talking about. He quoted 118 firefighters, for instance, who were talking about sounds of explosions, flashes of light, explosions visible around the buildings.
On the bottom?
At the top, where the jet plane impacts, at the onset of the destruction of the Twin Towers. He talked about...
These are explosions that happened before the plane hit? Is that what they're claiming? Is that the claim?
No. Although there are there's some evidence to actually support that as well.
Oh, okay.
We stick with the main event, the collapse of these buildings. So that, I'm a Reagan Republican. I have... This was quite a change of events.
So you're not like a Democrat trying to, I'm going to hate on with Bush or something like that?
No, no.
Okay, so that's how you first, a couple years ago, you got interested in this, you heard some theories, you said, this doesn't line up with what I've been told for all these years. Let's step back, and without getting into all the cards yet, but what for you is the most powerful evidence that you said, my goodness, the traditional arguments are not true? What was the most convincing one?
It adds up. I would have to say it's the tons of molten metal, though, found by the ironworkers, the first responders, flowing like lava, they said, in the basements of all three World Trade Center towers.
The number 7, Tower 7, is that the one you
Yeah, the one that hardly anybody knows about because it hasn't received any play on the media. 47-story skyscraper collapses in about 6.5 seconds into its own footprint. And we're told
it wasn't hit by a plane.
Correct.
But they say it was hit by these massive pieces of debris, tons of metal that hit the sides of them. That weakened the structure.
Yeah, it did.
There's pictures that seem to show that.
Indeed. NIST, well, no, actually there's not. There's the facade is clouded with smoke on the south side where we're told all this damage was. Nevertheless, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they suggest that this damage was not a consequent factor in the collapse. They call this collapse due to normal office fires in their December 18th update. And we had an opportunity to present the evidence that we're going to be talking about today in that meeting. It's now a part of the official record.
So this molten metal, that's the problem for you. Why is that a problem?
Well, tons of it. Seen by the World Trade Center structural engineer, Leslie Robertson. He says as of 21 days after the attack, molten steel was still flowing. Astani, another structural engineer who had unfettered access to the ground zero, suggests that he saw a melting of girders. In fact, he took photos of these, and we have them in our website, ae911truth.org.
And why is that a problem? Why is the melting of the girders problematic for you?
Well, because the official story says these are normal office fires. Normal office fires only get to be about 900, 1200 degrees. Right. Maybe 1400 degrees under very, very ideal fuel-air mixture ratios. Guess what? Steel doesn't begin to melt until about 2700 degrees, almost 3 times what we anticipate the temperatures of these fires were. That's Fahrenheit, 2700 degrees Fahrenheit. What about the jet fuel? Couldn't it heat it up the girders on impact to be hot enough to melt? The jet fuel is a hydrocarbon. It doesn't burn any hotter than desks, carpeting, chairs, 1400 degrees. It was a spectacular blast. Most of it burned up outside. The rest of it was gone in 10 minutes. So we have fairly normal office fires, as it turns out, in the Twin Towers as well. Now, no office fire has ever brought down a skyscraper because these are steel-framed and fireproofed skyscrapers, ever. And we have over 100 very large, very hot, and long-lasting fires in these steel-framed fireproof skyscrapers. So, all of a sudden, the three worst structural failures in modern history occur on one day. And one of them, as you mentioned, wasn't hit by an airplane. Mm-hmm. So what? I mean, okay. Let's
stop for a second here. You're claiming, obviously, you're doubting what's going on. You're saying that they can't be hot enough to melt steel. Something else melted it. You're just, asking these questions as an architect. You think, who did this then?
Well, we'll get to that.
Okay. Because I'm very curious about that.
Because where did the molten metal come from? Mm-hmm. Dr. Stephen Jones, a physicist formerly from Brigham Young University, analyzes the molten metal, a 40-pound chunk sent to him. He finds that it has aluminum, iron. It's not steel because it has very little chromium. So we're not talking about melted structural steel. We're talking about molten iron, which is the byproduct of thermate. Thermate.
Thermite.
There's thermite and there's thermate. Thermate is with added sulfur, lowers the melting temperature of steel.
Sorry.
It's okay. The point is that he finds the chemical evidence of thermate, iron, aluminum, sulfur, and manganese and potassium, and fluorine as well, in the ends of the beams, which the first responders and iron workers said were dripping with molten steel. He finds the evidence of this thermite cutter charge used by the military.
Okay, cutter charge. Now you're talking about something that's man-made. Let's get back to that right after this break. Possible man-made cutter charges, World Trade Center? We'll see right after this break.